This is the Loaded Radio Podcast.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another edition of the Loaded Radio Podcast. It is Scott Penfold here with you. And this week, man, quite the show, as I am going to be welcoming the guitar player from the Grammy Award-nominated band Sevendust. I'm talking about John Connolly, as they're releasing their 14th studio album, Truth Killer, on July 28th via the band's new label home, Napalm Records. Okay, it's the follow-up to 2020's Blood and Stone, and once again tracked at Studio Barbarosa in Gotha, California, with producer Michael Elvis Baskette, who's worked with like pretty much everybody, man, including like Alter Bridge, Slash, so many people. So really excited to be talking to John. We'll be getting to him in just a couple of seconds. First off, though, want to ask you and remind you, if you are listening to this podcast on YouTube, to give us a thumbs up and as well to subscribe to the channel, as it means a great deal to us and really does help. Or if you're listening via Spotify or the Loaded Radio app or wherever you get your podcasts, then just sit back and take it easy and enjoy the podcast. Now, Sevendust is one of those bands that have kept their original lineup, being LaJohn Witherspoon, Clint Lowry, John Connolly, Vince Hornsby, and Morgan Rose, and they still sound just as great as they did back in 1997 with their self-titled debut album. The tracks I've heard off of the new record, Truth Killer, already sound great, man. They sound like Sevendust, and you can always depend on Sevendust to be just that. With track names like I Might Let the Devil Win, Truth Killer, of course, Won't Stop the Bleeding, everything Sick Mouth, and Holy Water, you can guarantee you're going to get a straight-up Sevendust banger of an album when it comes to Truth Killer when it does drop on July 28th. So that wasting any more time, let's get to it now, man. Joining us right now here on the podcast is the one and only John Connolly, guitar player from Sevendust. John, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
I do want to talk about the new album, man. Really hyped about it. The songs I've heard off it already are just killer. How was it working with Michael Baskette for Truth Killer?
Man, it's he's just that guy that, I mean, I don't know, man. I've made so much music with him since, I mean, it's literally going on 12 years now, because I started making music with him back in probably 2011, 2012, when he mixed the first Projected record. And the unusual thing about that is he doesn't, nobody ever sits on his mixes, ever.
I know, I can imagine.
So, you know, he's sort of one of those guys who's just like, he sort of does his own thing. But, and I didn't know that. I honestly had no idea until it was probably about 5 years ago. Because, you know, when I came in, I was like, well, dude, you know, I'll just sit in there with you. And if you have any questions, you know, because I'm sitting here working off an inbox, and, you know, I know how to produce a little bit at this point. Yeah. And I was like, you know, file management is probably pretty shady and you're going to be looking for stuff. So it's probably going to be easier if I just make myself available. I'll go through all the editing with Jeff, and then I'll just sit on the mix, you know. And it was cool because we just hung out for 10 days. He mixed the record, asked a lot of questions. We ate a lot of food, you know, got to know each other, and, you know, he mixed the crap out of the record. And then I come to find out I was like the last guy who's been in an entire mix with him, like, ever.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I was like, everyone was like, man, how did you work that? I'm like, I don't know. I just told him I was coming in. I didn't really ask the question. I probably should have. Now, obviously, now that he knows where everything is and all that stuff, mixes are an interesting thing for me, because I'm never the guy who's going to go in and with a list. It's usually more of a vibe, because I'm paying him as much for his vision. You know, I'm not gonna hire someone, you know, commission an artist to come in and do, you know, a painting and then tell them how to paint the painting.
Right.
I want them to, like, I'm going to give them all the colors. I'm going to give them the brushes. I'll pick out all of the stuff that I want them to use, but I want to see what they put together, you know, like without any interference. And, you know, sometimes I can listen to a mix from him and I can be like, well, you know what, maybe it needs a little more of this. It's never a blatant thing. It's never like, all right, that's missing, or this is way too loud, or what was he thinking? It's always the subtle little things. And then as I get into the record, I've realized, okay, it's more of a vibe that he's got. Like, this is a thing. So a lot of those decisions that I'll make super early when I'm hearing things, I'll always take the step back. But I think I always take the step back because of those 10 days that I spent with him in the mix room. You know, I'm the only guy. I remember when we got Blood and Stone, I remember he hit me up. He goes, "You have any suggestions?" I was like, "No, dude, I love it." And he goes, "Really?" I was like, "There's one fade at the end that I'm hearing a little bit of noise, but I think it's crap that it's obviously going to be gone when we go to master.
Right.
You don't want to change anything else. And I was like, no, I don't. Because he goes, would you have done it differently? I'm like, of course I would. Well, what would you do? And I'm like, I don't want to tell you what, like, that's not my job. My job is over. Right. Your job is, you're on deck right now and you just knocked it out of the park. It's not the way that I would have hit it, but it still went out of the park. So it's like, who am I to tell you how to do your job? But I just love working with that dude, man. He's the first to say no. Like, I mean, I've rolled in, been like, yeah, I got the best chorus for this. These guys are going to lose their minds when they hear this. And I play it for them and everyone just kind of looks at me like I'm an idiot. And Elvis will just go, he always does the same thing. He goes, yeah, I don't know. I'm like, oh. And that is like 100% no. That's his nice way of telling you absolutely not. It's never going on the record. And then you go, all right. I mean, I think I've challenged him a few times, but 9 times out of 10, when it comes to those things, I might not be super far off base, but he's usually right. So it's always cool to have the guy who's the fan, the guy that gets the band, but the guy who I can't speak highly enough about. He's a great singer. He's a great guitar player, but like his drum mixes, to me, he mixes like a drummer and he's not a drummer. Right. He, like, the drummer is probably his weak thing, but he mixes more like a drummer than some drummers that we've had mix. And as an ex-drummer, I love that because I'm always pretty drum heavy.
No, for sure.
Everyone's like, oh, Jesus, why is the kick and snare so loud? I'm like, because Tommy Lee was cool and they did it on the Motley Crue record with John Connolly. And it's like, yeah, you're supposed to get excited about stuff, but I don't know, man. It's like every time we sit down with Elvis, it's just like coming home. It's just like another guy. You don't feel like there's ever the red light's not on. There's never any pressure. There's a lot of work. And we have a schedule that works really, really well, between the 5 of us. I mean, he gives us the ability to kind of come and go as we need to, not as we please. It's not like, oh, I don't want to be around next week because I'm just bored or I want to go do something. But, we're in that day and age of our careers where, there's a lot of graduations and weddings and births. We've got kids having kids and stuff like that. So anything could be on the radar. Oh man, Clint was like, dude, I got this trip to, I promised Tara I would take her. We're going to go out to the West Coast. I was like, dude, how long are you going to be gone? It was like 3 days. I'm like, go, please. We've got plenty of stuff that we can be doing during that 3 days. And, he's super accommodating. But he doesn't let anything slide, man. Nothing. Like, he's not, I don't want to say he's an easy producer, but I think he's easy once you understand what he's looking for. And if you don't give it to him, he'll keep working it until he gets it. Especially in the vocal booth. I'm like, because that's where I hear the actual numbers. I remember one time I was in there singing on Projected. I'm like, dude, if I hear anything with a teen on it again, I'm going to lose my mind. He's like, no, this is all just about this one thing on the double. And I'm like, well, let me do the original over. And he goes, no, it was cool. And I don't want to edit anything. And I'm like, dude, maybe sometimes it'd be easier to edit. And he goes, you got it in you, man. And I'm like, all right, that's fine. And that's probably what I love about him most is, as a producer, at least with my own stuff, I'll get tired of hearing my own voice real fast. So I'll go straight to chopping and editing and doing whatever I need to do to make it right. He would just prefer take the extra 2 minutes behind the microphone and get the real take, and it's like, does 2 minutes save me time when I'm sitting here by myself? Yeah, probably. Is it that significant that I didn't take the time and just do it right in the first place? No, but it's a habit that I have picked up from working with him. There's so many times where I'd be like, oh, just tune it, man. It's fine. It's just a demo. And then there's other times I'm like, what are you doing, man? You're literally, you're right here in front of the microphone. You can't just do it right. So I really do enjoy working with him, man. I've had such a good time doing the Projected stuff with him. And then, bringing Sevendust into that world has been great too. Clint did his first solo record with him as well. And it's 6 degrees of separation. Alter Bridge obviously has done most of their career with him. Yep. And that's sort of how we got the introduction. I remember they were Mark was actually in the studio doing the first Tremonti record, and we were in the next studio, A room, B room. He was moving from one to the other, and I was moving basically like about 2 or 3 weeks behind him. And it was just one of those, having a few beers, and Flip was like, man, let's just call up Elvis and have a mix. I'm like, dude, I don't have that kind of money to spend on a record. Like, I can't do it. He goes, well, he really wants one of your guitars. And I was like, which one? So he was like, yeah, man. He goes, I'll do it for a little bit of cash and that one particular Les Paul custom. And I was like, the one that I'm never playing? Sold, yours. Because he's here in town. Like, literally, he lives, he's about 4.5 miles. I think the studio is more like 8 or 9 miles from where I live. So, there's anything that I've left over there, I know I'm going to see it again, and I know I'm going to play it again, and I know I'm going to use it again. We went back and forth on a Marshall amp for about a week, and he was like, dude, I gotta have it. And I was like, I kept digging my heels in, and he finally said the one thing that made the most sense. He was like, you're only ever going to use it over here anyways. And I was like, well, yeah, that's true, because I never fired up at the house. I was like, you probably would get a whole lot more use out of it.
Right.
Yeah. It was like, all right, this makes sense. Yeah. I mean, it's nice to have that guy in town. Like, it's one of the benefits to having him live here that I don't speak about often enough, because, it's like when you're flying in and out and you've got family stuff going on, it's a thing. It's production. For me, I think the biggest production is juggling the family stuff and the studio stuff. Because sometimes I would just pack a bag. Like, if it was a late night, all right, I'll just crash over there at the studio. No point in driving home. But I was the only guy not staying at the house. So Elvis was sort of, it was bittersweet, because he was like, I'm spending all the time with the guys, and I'm not spending nearly as much time with you because you keep driving home every night. So last couple of records, I was like, all right, I'm going to throw a backpack in the back, and, a couple nights here and there, we'll just, get nutty and have a pool night and have some drinks or whatever and listen to demos and, reminisce, do all that. We know so many of the same people, and we work with so many of the same people that it's, you would think he'd run out of stories, but I think we keep finding more. But yeah, man, he's one that diamond in the rough that once in a blue moon, you find someone like it,
I definitely want to ask about some of the songs on the album too, which of course have him all over. I'm like, the song "Fence," which is like the first single that came out. What can you tell me about that song? That was
the first song that we worked on as a band in the farmhouse. We went out to the farmhouse. LJ has a farmhouse out in Kansas City, and we just figured it'd be kind of a cool spot to go out. I mean, literally, there's nothing but cows and lots of land and, a farmhouse. So, we just basically stocked it up and just worked on music, and there's no distractions, no nothing. But an electronic drum set to put in there, like an Elisa's kit, just so that Morgan didn't have to lug, a full-size kit around. I mean, this is super, super user-friendly, much easier in a demo scenario where you don't have to be setting up microphones, not doing any of that stuff. He just needs to hit pads. And this has actual cymbals with hi-hats that open and close. So for him, he was like, man, this feels like a drum set. It feels better than a drum set. Like, he never wanted to stop playing. So I was like, all right, well, that's sort of, it checks that box. We got him super excited about playing, in demo mode. But that was it. I remember we listened to that song. He fired up the drums, and that was the first beat that he actually had recorded, was what was going on in the verse. And he started playing it, and it was super related to what I had on the demo, but it wasn't exact. And I was like, oh, let me just lock in with the kick drum. And then all of a sudden there's Sevendust. You know what I mean? It was like, within 2 minutes, it went from, okay, that sounds like a John Connolly sounding demo, to now it sounds like Sevendust.
Yeah, that's
and that
cool.
was cool. Like, the second that happened, all of a sudden I saw LJ start bouncing around, and then Clint starts hammering on programming and grabs a guitar. And then Vinny's running around, and it was just like, I don't know, man. Like, you always think you're going to show up to one of those sessions and it's not going to happen, but it hasn't happened yet. You always think you're not going to get the reaction, but it's funny. It's like, man, we're still in our 50s and we still get, like, the hairs on your arms still stand up when stuff like that happens. So for us, that was the beginning. That was sort of it. It was like, okay, the record isn't going to sound like this song, but this song is going to be an important song on the record. It is, in some ways, I don't want to say it's the most Sevendust-ish, but I think there's a rhythm thing that goes on with the kick drum and the guitar on the verse that's just so Sevendust that there's no other way around it. And I don't know how to quantify it or explain it because we're not reinventing any wheel.
Right.
But there's just something when Morgan does a kick pattern and we lock into it that identifies as very Sevendust to me. And I love that. You know, I remember when we finished that day, it was like, okay, we're going to have a good session. We got a lot of good songs out of that session. It started with Fence, Truth Killer, I think was second or third. We worked on, oh good Lord, there were a bunch that came out of that. Hang on, I've got the whole record sitting here right in front of me.
Holy Water, possibly.
What's that?
Holy Water, maybe.
Holy Water, yes. Holy Water was around. Let me see. Superficial Drug. Superficial Drug was one of those ones that came out of another demo. That was on the next day.
Cool.
We took a lot of music from that session that ended up on this record. So, yeah, I mean, you know, sometimes you do a writing session and sometimes you get nothing. I mean, I'm not going to lie. There's been times where we've been like, you know, you can salvage a bridge or have something that you might be able to revisit, you know, and ends up on a solo project or a side project or whatever. But, you know, sometimes you just show up and then the magic happens.
I was going to ask you about Holy Water and where that song came from, because another great single. How did that one come about?
That was just one of the Clint demos that I kept, dude. That should have been the first single, if you ask me.
Right.
I thought everything was great, but I wanted to lead with Holy Water, and everyone was like, "Really?" I was like, there's a certain thing about that song that I don't know what it was. It was the one that usually a deal breaker for me, or the one that, you know, seals it for me, is when I wake up the next morning and it's in my head. Like I haven't even gotten out of the bed and that song was in my head. I couldn't remember what the riff was much like. I just remember the vocal hook on the chorus. And I remember I was just like, this is an important song. This one's got to stick around. And we worked on it. And at least I got it as a grat track and a video. So I was super, super thankful for that. But it was sort of a coin toss. It was like, all right, you know, everything might play a little bit better to open up some radio avenue. You know, I think it's sort of viewer's choice on that one. But that was one of the earliest demos that I'd heard from Clint. I remember when he brought in Holy Water and Truth Killer were like the two that I remember that I heard, and I went, okay, let's, no matter what happens, let me get my phone. Let me actually record him playing that so that we don't ever lose. You know what I mean? Like, right. I want a copy of a copy of a copy just in case, you know, because you'd be surprised with 14 records how many great pieces of music you just lose track of, you know what I mean? Or you start working on something. There's a couple songs on this record that we were like, oh man, we totally forgot to put the bridge back in. And it was such a cool piece of music. You know, you got to be a little better at file management when there's so much going on. But yeah, Holy Water was one of the early ones that I remember. I remember riding with Morgan in the car, and I was like, that's the first single. And he goes, really? Because he goes, I think Truth Killer is. I was like, no. I was like, I think there's something magical. There's something very magical about both of those songs for different reasons. You know, I was like, Truth Killer, I think is going to be one of the fan favorite live tracks. Like, even though it's not a grat track, I think that song, it needs to do what Home did. You know, be the title track, didn't have a video, wasn't a single, but it was the title track for the record. It has an infectious type of, you know, hook to it, but Holy Water was one for me, man. I mean, it was one that I remember, you know, you put stars next to ones when you're listening to them. I remember that one had all the stars. I was like, I don't know what the inspiration was. I don't know what you're talking about, Clint, but I am 100% on that page with you.
I do want to bring this up as well. Speaking of Morgan, now Morgan had previously mentioned that retirement had been something that had been discussed within the band. What's the status of that? Is that like a thing, or? I
mean, here's the thing, you know, I don't know if we ever really want to retire, but we also sort of want people to, you know, don't expect us to show up in the year 2025 and play 250 shows. You know, right. The only way something like that would happen is if for some freak, you know, reason, Metallica just, nobody likes Metallica anymore, and all of a sudden Sevendust just playing stadiums. we'll probably show up to play a few more of those gigs because I'm sure
I can imagine. Yeah.
I'm sure the way Metallica is rolling is pretty sweet. But I think for us, it's just, just finding that balance, and just being able to spend, I don't want to, say spend less time on tour, but I think the goal is to spend more time with our families, whether that be at home or on tour or wherever, I mean, a lot of our kids are going off to school. Some of our kids are going off to school out of the country. So, it's like the family time has to have a big part in all of our lives. And when we started Sevendust, you don't have families, you don't have mortgages, you don't have kids, you don't have any of that stuff. There's no responsibility. So it's super easy to just go 100% and figure out what is Sevendust. We didn't know what we were when we first started. It took us 4 or 5 records and we were still scratching our head going, well,
What do you think of this whole new metal resurgence going on? Do you consider the band to be new metal?
I was talking about that in the last interview. I think part of our problem, that we won't commit to a lane, whether we're hard rock, whether we're metal, whether we're acoustic. New metal was the thing that I think we sort of got stuck with it because no one else, they couldn't figure out what else we were, and
Sure.
New metal was big. But new metal was like a little bit more rap based than I think we are. And I think the reason we got lumped in, I hate to say this, but LJ's black, so it was like, it was one of the most racist things I think we probably ever fell victim to. It was like, wait a minute, just because, if it was a white guy and we didn't pick up an acoustic guitar, they'd be like, all right, well, they're not new metal at all. Because there were solos on the first record. There weren't a ton of solos on the second record, but it's like we've never had an aversion to solos, but I think we started our band at a time and a place where they weren't super popular or focused on. But here's the interesting thing about the new metal thing. Like, if we are new metal, that's cool. If we were new metal and we're not anymore, okay, that's cool too. I never really thought we were new metal, but it was the closest category to put us in. And it was all the bands that we came up with, all these bands that are like very popular right now, which, if it's coming around, then great. Static X, a big thing going on there. You got Disturbed back out on tour. I know Godsmack's, on tour. So there were a lot of those types of bands, Limp Bizkit, Deftones. They were all considered new metal as well. And I was like, cool. If new metal is cool, then that's great. Because I remember it was really cool. And then it wasn't cool at all, but it was still cool. And now it's supposedly cool again. So
it's cool again. It's like
cool again, and it's like, I don't know what sparked it. Like, well,
the festival in Vegas helped, I think.
Big time.
Yeah.
Sick of the World was a huge thing as far as the one-day festival, for sure. There's no doubt about it.
For sure. Word
on the street is I think they're planning on making it even bigger next year because of how successful it did this past year. But man, it's like, I'll take it. Like, I don't know where it came from, and I'm not sure if we're even, this will be the next debate for the next, 6 months will be like, well, Sevendust wasn't really even new metal. It's like, okay, well, we were when it was cool, and now we're not when it's cool again. If we were then we are now. So I don't know.
Now, are you involved with Lejean's solo album at all? Have you heard anything of it or anything like that?
I've heard a lot of it. Yeah, I've heard tons of it.
Is it good? Is it cool? Is it like Sevendust?
It's cool. No, it's not like Sevendust at all. And well, you know what? It's no, actually, it's not like Sevendust, but it's very LJ. So it may have more, like on a first listen, you may go, oh no, this sounds like Sevendust. If you listen to a singer and you associate the singer with a band, then obviously there's going to be some moments on there where you go, yeah, that feels very Sevendust, because LJ's vocal style and tendency is not going to change.
Sure.
However, it is a lot more R&B and country. He's got a lot of those elements going on in there. Yeah. I think the last thing he wanted to do was, recreate what's going on in Sevendust. For one of us, like for Clint to step out and do a solo record, or Call Me No One, or me to do Projected, it may be a similar type of music, but the vocal thing is so different that usually the identity, at least for me, completely goes away as soon as the voice changes. If LJ were to go sing with Static X, it would sound a little like Sevendust to me. You know, I mean, I've been around the dude for almost 30 years. So when I hear him saying there is a certain thing about Sevendust that I just associate with it, but no, his record's great, man. I mean, I don't know which songs are going to make it. He's got a bunch, but yeah, there's a lot of stuff on there that I think Sevendust fans are going to be really into because it doesn't sound just like this band at all. You know, it really doesn't sound like Sevendust at all.
Oh, wow, really, eh?
Which is awesome. Yeah. Which is, I mean, it's very him though. If you
Very
know
cool.
what he loves, it's very, very LJ. So
awesome. Thanks again, John, and
right.
all of this, man. Can't wait to see you back out there on the road again with Static X and Dope this fall. It's going to be great.
all right, sounds good, man. Thanks,
Have a good one. Take care.
All right, you too. All right, bye.
All right, there he is. That was John Connolly from Sevendust. And yeah, the new album's called Truth Killer. That drops on July 28th via Napalm Records, the follow-up to 2020's Blood and Stone, and produced by Michael Elvis Baskette, who is just a killer producer. And yeah, the album sounds just killer. The tracks I've heard off it so far are just phenomenal and great there speaking with John. Don't forget to check out loadedradio.com for all your hard rock and metal news. It's constantly updated. As well, you can get past episodes of this very podcast there as well, and via the Loaded Radio free app. That's completely free to download. Get it wherever you get your apps or at loadedradio.com. Okay, so just a reminder there. As well, we've got the 24-hour live radio station, which is streaming 24/7 with live personalities and specialty shows and everything. Get that via the app and as well loadedradio.com, and tons more. Check it out for yourself, just a click away, okay? But I'm Scott Penfold, and I will talk to you again next week for an all-new edition of the Loaded Radio Podcast, and we'll talk to you then.
Loaded Radio.